The NPA is expected to announce whether or not it'll reinstate corruption charges against President Jacob Zuma. Last month, the North Gauteng High Court ruled that the NPA's 2009 decision to drop its case against Zuma was irrational and must be reviewed. Let's cross to Pretoria now, where eNCA specialist reporter Karen Morn is standing by ahead of the announcement. Karen, so what can we actually expect today?
Well, it was in this very room in 2009, Shahan, that acting head of the NPA, Mokotedi Mshe, announced what many had been expecting for weeks, that the NPA had decided to drop the charges against President Jacob Zuma. Of course, that decision caused a raft of litigation from the Democratic Alliance, who really had to fight to get access to the spy tapes, so-called spy tapes, on which the NPA had based its decision. Of course, Mshe's decision now being found by a full bench of the North Gauteng High Court to have been irrational, which effectively returns the situation to the status quo, i.e. that President Jacob Zuma remains an accused person. The NPA expected to announce through its head, Shaun Abrams, today whether the NPA has decided to appeal against that decision or to exercise its option to withdraw the prosecution against Jacob Zuma in circumstances where it knows it will have to fully explain on a legal, unrational basis why it has done so, or the most politically explosive of all of those options, to prosecute the president.
Now, Karen, the NPA lost a similar appeal around its decision to drop charges against crime intelligence boss Richard Mdluli. That's set a precedent, of course. What's the likelihood of them winning an appeal in this case?
I think that's an incredibly important question, and it will be one of the ones that we choose to pose to NDPP Shaun Abrams. Really, what is the difference between the Zuma matter and the Richard Mdluli case? We know the NPA fought tooth and nail not to proceed with that prosecution, but following a very strong ruling from the Supreme Court of Appeal, proceeded with the murder case against him and proceeded with a corruption case against him, which was subsequently withdrawn because of lack of documentation. We don't know at this point what the status of that particular matter is. However, what is the crucial difference between these two cases? I think the NPA will probably argue that in the case of President Jacob Zuma, they believe there was such profound political interference in the prosecution of the president that it is simply untenable for it to proceed with that prosecution, arguing very strongly in court that even though the NPA has never ever said that there was not a strong case against the president, the political interference of Scorpions boss Leonard McCarthy and then former NPA head Bulelani Nguka made it simply untenable for the prosecuting authority to proceed.
Now, Karen, we heard in Judge Ledwaba's ruling that there were key people in the NPA who wanted to go ahead with this corruption case against President Jacob Zuma back then, but of course Mokotedi Mshe went against their judgment. What do you think is the current feeling regarding the top prosecutors at the NPA on this case? Do they have a say as to whether or not President Jacob Zuma should face corruption charges?
Well, in this particular matter, the call will ultimately be made by the National Director of Public Prosecutions. But you are right, Shahan. One of the key bases for the DA's successful court action was that the prosecutors in this case, Billy Downer, Anton Steinberg, George Beloy, all said that they did not believe that in the wake of the spy tapes, the NPA could make a decision on whether or not to proceed with this prosecution. They were adamant that this matter should come before a judge and that a judge should make a determination if the case was so tainted that it could not proceed. Remember, during the High Court hearing of this particular matter, Ledwaba making it very clear that, and getting those admissions from the NPA, that it was not like evidence had been planted. It was not that evidence had been manipulated. It was not that there was anything substantively wrong with the merits of the case against the president. It was simply that the timing at which he was re-indicted had been interfered with for political ends, and not successful political ends, Shahan. Remember, of course, the thinking at that time, according to Willie Hofmeyer, from what he was able to determine in the wake of the spy tapes, was that was the belief that charging the president pre-Polokwane would make him look like a victim and would improve his chances against President Thabo Mbeki in the race for succession of the ANC. Now, we know that that did not prove to be the case. So there was no real substantive harm to to the president in terms of the timing of the indictment. Ledwaba stressing that during his questioning and ultimately in the court's judgment. There was nothing wrong with the case against the president, and the NPA itself has never admitted that there was any substantive or any interference at all in the merits of the case against Jacob Zuma.
All right, thanks very much for the insight. There was eNCA specialist reporter Karen Morn, and we will bring you that press conference live here on eNCA.